Welcome to Kiki's Talk Buffet. Let's talk it out.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a really close look at M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled.
Ah, yes, a classic.
Definitely. It's a book that's clearly struck a chord with, well, a lot of people. I mean, it sold over 7 million copies just in North America, translated into tons of languages.
It really digs into some fundamental stuff, doesn't it? How we understand ourselves, love, psychological growth, even spiritual growth.
Exactly. So we've been looking at excerpts, and our mission today really is to pull out the key principles Peck offers for, navigating life's challenges and achieving a bit more maturity.
Think of it as getting to the heart of his insights, maybe a bit faster than reading the whole thing cover to cover again.
Right. And what I find fascinating is, even though it's been around a while, some of the perspectives still feel surprisingly fresh, maybe even a bit counterintuitive.
Definitely. So where should we start?
Well, let's jump right into maybe the most fundamental idea he puts out there right at the beginning.
Okay, the big one. Life is difficult.
Yeah. Seems simple, but wow, the implications.
It's true. And it's funny how many of us, resist that simple statement. We sort of have this hidden expectation that life should be easy, comfortable.
Smooth sailing.
Exactly. Free of major hurdles. But Peck's point is that accepting the inherent difficulty is actually the first crucial step to overcoming those difficulties.
That really flips the script, doesn't it? It's like when things get tough, we often feel like something's wrong, or maybe we're just unlucky.
Right. But if you start from, okay, life is difficult, challenges will come up.
Then you're not blindsided. You can actually start dealing with it.
Precisely. Once you accept that life involves solving a series of problems, you're less likely to get bogged down by resentment when they inevitably appear. And this acceptance, it sets the stage for the main tool Peck talks about.
Which is self-discipline.
It's self-discipline, yeah.
Sounds, straightforward enough.
Yeah.
But he really unpacks what that means. He sees it as absolutely vital for dealing with pain, solving problems.
He even argues that a lack of it is often at the root of psychological issues. But it's key to understand what he means by self-discipline. It's not about, being super rigid or punishing yourself.
Okay.
It's more about actively engaging with problems, facing them head-on, instead of trying to duck and weave around them.
Okay. Active engagement. And he breaks it down, right, into 4 specific aspects.
That's right. The 4 pillars, as you could call them. Delaying gratification, acceptance of responsibility, dedication to truth, and balancing.
Okay, let's tackle that first one. Delaying gratification, what does that actually look like?
Well, think of it simply as choosing a bigger reward later over a smaller pleasure right now, postponing immediate satisfaction for a more significant long-term gain.
Like studying for an exam instead of going out.
Exactly like that. Or saving money instead of splurging. Peck uses a really memorable, almost quirky example to illustrate it.
You mean the financial analyst and the cake frosting? That one really stuck with me.
Yes. So this woman, a financial analyst in her 30s, is in therapy for procrastination. Nothing's really clicking until the therapist asks this odd question: how do you eat cake?
Okay.
She admits she always eats the frosting first, the best part, right? Because it's the most enjoyable bit. And this small habit mirrored her work approach.
Tackling the easy, fun tasks first.
Exactly. And putting off the harder, less pleasant stuff. Procrastinating.
Okay, so how did that insight help?
Well, the therapist suggested she try reversing it. Eat the cake first, save the frosting for last. In work terms, tackle the difficult tasks first.
Right, get the hard stuff out of the way.
Yeah. The logic, framed financially for her, was that 1 hour of unpleasant work followed by 6 hours of easier stuff is a way better investment than the other way around. Get the pain over with.
Makes sense. Did it work?
It did. By consciously choosing to delay that immediate gratification, the easy tasks, the frosting, she actually overcame her procrastination.
Wow. From cake to conquering procrastination.
And Peck argues this is a skill we start learning, or should learn, really early on. Think about little kids learning to wait their turn for a toy.
Yeah, waiting means you get a better, longer turn later. It's that basic principle.
It's essentially eat your vegetables before dessert applied across life. But he also points out the problems when this doesn't develop, especially in the teenage years.
Right. Teachers see that all the time, don't they?
Oh, definitely. Teens who haven't grasped delaying gratification can really struggle. They might prioritize hanging out or scrolling social media over homework.
And their grades suffer.
Exactly. Or act impulsively without thinking long term. And sadly, that lack of foresight can sometimes contribute to bigger issues like substance abuse or getting into trouble.
And Peck really hammers home the role of family, of parents, in fostering this skill.
Absolutely crucial. Kids learn by watching. They internalize what they see modeled. It's really hard for a child to learn self-control if their parent is constantly impulsive or avoids difficult tasks.
You can't really teach what you don't practice yourself.
Pretty much. You can tell them all you want, but what they see is what sinks in.
That makes perfect sense. And it flows right into the importance of parental love, doesn't it? Especially how it connects to developing this self-discipline.
Yes, love is absolutely fundamental in Peck's view, not just providing the basics like food and shelter, but really investing quality time.
Being present.
Being present, understanding their specific needs, making them feel consistently valued and well loved. That consistent care builds security, self-esteem. It's the foundation.
And he suggests that without that solid foundation of love and feeling valued, kids can really struggle to develop self-discipline later on. What's the connection there?
Well, think back to that financial analyst again. Her difficulty valuing her own time, managing it, it wasn't just about cake frosting.
Right.
It was partly rooted in childhood feelings of essentially abandonment. Her parents, though capable, sent her to foster families during school holidays.
Ouch, that would send a
Yes,
message.
exactly. It created this underlying feeling of being less important, not quite worthy of consistent care. That lack of feeling genuinely valued made it harder for her to develop that internal self-worth that fuels self-care, which includes self-discipline.
It's a powerful link. How feeling valued translates into valuing yourself enough to do the hard things. Okay, so that's delaying gratification. The second aspect was acceptance of responsibility.
Right, taking responsibility.
Seems straightforward, but Peck adds some layers, especially distinguishing between neurosis and character disorder.
Yeah, this is really interesting. Both issues stem from problems with responsibility, but they go in opposite directions.
How so?
Well, neurotics tend to take on too much responsibility. They blame themselves for things that aren't really their fault, things outside their control.
Okay. And character disorders.
They do the opposite. They avoid responsibility. They consistently blame other people, circumstances, anything but themselves.
He had some striking examples from his time in Okinawa, didn't he?
Yes, very clear illustrations. There was a military officer with a pretty severe drinking problem.
Okay.
He completely refused to see it as his issue. He blamed Okinawa, said it was boring, nothing else to do, zero personal accountability.
Wow. Blaming
Yeah.
the island.
Then there was a young military wife. She attempted suicide, and she blamed her unhappiness entirely on being stationed there, on her loneliness.
Rather than seeing if she could take steps to change her situation.
Exactly. No ownership of her internal state or potential actions, all external blame.
And then the contrast, the neurotic woman.
Right. She was also lonely, but she turned it all inward, blamed herself entirely, wondering what was wrong with her, why other wives didn't like her.
So she took too much responsibility.
Pretty much. Therapy actually revealed that her higher intelligence and ambition made it hard for some peers to connect with her. It wasn't all her fault. The key is she internalized it, while the others pushed the blame outwards.
It really shows how differently people handle responsibility. And Peck also mentions this idea. Sometimes people give up freedom to avoid the pain of responsibility. How does that work?
It sounds a bit backward, right? But think about, say, the doctor he mentions who always resented his boss. Sometimes, unconsciously, people give up their autonomy, their independence, because making choices and being accountable for them is, well, it's hard. It can be anxiety-provoking.
So it's easier to have someone else to blame.
In a way, yeah. By blaming an external authority, a boss, the system, whatever,
Yeah.
you avoid that discomfort of having to steer your own ship and face the consequences if you hit rocks. It's like psychologically outsourcing the burden.
That's insightful. Okay, on to the third pillar. Dedication to the truth. Again, sounds simple, but he uses that powerful analogy of a map.
Yes, the map analogy is central. Our understanding of reality, our worldview, it's like a map we use to navigate life.
The more accurate the map.
The better you can handle the terrain, the challenges. But, as Peck points out, a lot of people are surprisingly resistant to actually, learning the truth or updating their maps.
Like clinging to an old paper map when you've got GPS showing new roads and construction,
Yeah.
you'll get lost.
Exactly. And he says the real difficulty isn't usually creating the map in the first place. It's the constant revision that's needed.
Because the world changes and we change.
Absolutely. Holding on to outdated beliefs, refusing to integrate new information, that's a major source of mental trouble. Peck uses the psychological term transference for this.
Transfers. Okay, explain that a bit.
Think of your childhood experiences creating a kind of lens. You look at the world through this lens, even as an adult. But sometimes that lens is distorted by old experiences, old settings from the past.
So you're imposing old beliefs onto new situations.
Pretty much. Childhood beliefs, expectations. You overlay them onto current adult relationships and situations, often unconsciously. Can you give an example?
Yeah, that helps make it concrete.
Okay, consider the computer technician Peck describes. He really struggled with relationships, couldn't hold down a job. Why? Deep down, he couldn't trust anyone.
And that came from.
Childhood experiences, parents who made promises they didn't keep, forgot important events. He internalized this belief. People I rely on will let me down.
And he carried that map into adulthood.
Exactly. He generalized it. All authority figures, all potential partners, they were viewed through that lens of unreliability. His old, outdated map prevented him from forming healthy bonds or trusting employers.
That's a tough pattern to break. It shows how those early maps can really dictate our path if we don't examine them.
And Peck notes how hard it is to revise them. For that technician, trusting someone new felt like betraying his core understanding of the world.
Even if that understanding was hurting him.
Right. And facing the reality of his parents' feelings would have been incredibly painful. Plus, that belief, no one can be trusted, it served a protective function once. Letting go of that, even though it was limiting him now, felt dangerous.
And this dedication to truth isn't just personal, right?
Yeah.
He applies it to leaders, too.
Yes, absolutely. Leaders operate with maps, too. If they become closed off to new information, to different viewpoints, unwilling to have their maps challenged.
They make bad decisions. Things stagnate.
Exactly. True dedication to truth means being open to challenge, willing to constantly refine your understanding.
Which leads us nicely into self-examination. It's not just about observing the world, but looking inward.
Precisely. That dedication to truth has to include a really rigorous, honest look at ourselves, our biases, our motives, our assumptions.
Which can be uncomfortable.
Often more uncomfortable than analyzing external stuff. That's why many avoid it. But Peck insists it's absolutely vital for growth.
And then there's honesty in communication. Being truthful with others, even when it's hard.
Yes. He argues that while honesty might sting in the moment, avoiding it, resorting to deception, causes much bigger problems down the line. It erodes trust, prevents real connections.
Self-deception is bad, but lying to others is worse.
That's his take. He even touches on parents sometimes holding back the full truth from kids, trying to protect them.
But it can end up backfiring or causing confusion.
Right. Which brings us to the tricky subject of the white lie.
Yes. The harmless lie. Peck doesn't quite see it that way.
No. He suggests these seemingly minor omissions or fudges can actually be more insidious than outright black lies.
Why is that?
Because they still deviate from the truth, obviously, but they also obscure reality, prevent real understanding. And because we often label them as harmless or even kind, they can become a really pervasive, unexamined form of dishonesty.
So he provides some guidelines for navigating this.
He does. Some rules for genuine honesty. First, never tell a flat-out black lie. Second, recognize that not telling the truth when it's needed is basically the same as lying.
Okay.
Third, don't withhold truth purely for selfish reasons. Fourth, only withhold it if your genuine intention is to protect the other person a high bar. And fifth, always assess if the other person actually needs to know the truth in that situation.
It's a demanding framework for honesty.
Yeah.
Makes you think. Okay, final pillar. Balancing.
Balancing, yes.
This sounds like maintaining equilibrium, like a constant adjustment act.
It really is. Self-discipline isn't about rigid, inflexible rules. It's about having flexible boundaries, adapting wisely to different situations. It requires judgment.
He uses anger as an example, right?
Yeah, anger itself isn't bad. It can be a healthy and necessary response sometimes. But it needs flexibility. You need to express it appropriately, with judgment, depending on the circumstances, not just uncontrolled rage or complete suppression.
Your higher level thinking needs to guide the emotional response.
Exactly. Having an adaptable emotional feedback system, he calls it. And he gives examples of when that system goes wrong.
Like the case studies.
The schizophrenic woman who, in therapy, had to learn nuanced rules about who could be allowed into which parts of her home. Before, her inflexible system led to either inappropriate closeness or total isolation.
Finding the balance.
Or the woman who wrote ridiculously elaborate thank you notes for everything. It became so burdensome she started avoiding gifts and social events. Therapy helped her find a more balanced, appropriate level of expressing gratitude.
So balance isn't just about emotions, but also actions and expectations. And part of this balance involves giving up things. That sounds odd with self-discipline.
It does sound counterintuitive at first, but what Peck means by giving up is the willingness to let go of certain desires, expectations, maybe even parts of our identity when they're no longer serving us or are actually harmful.
Okay, like what?
He shares a personal story about learning to ride a bike. He didn't want to slow down on a steep curve, wanted the thrill, but clinging to that immediate desire led to a bigger pain, crashing. He had to give up the immediate thrill to maintain balance and avoid injury.
Sacrificing a smaller pleasure to avoid a bigger pain or achieve a larger goal.
Exactly. And he applies this to much bigger things, like the father who was obsessed with winning at chess against his daughter.
All right. That was sad.
His rigid need to win, his inability to give up that competitive drive in that context, damaged the relationship. He valued winning over connection.
So for people struggling psychologically, this giving up is key to healing.
Peck argues it's crucial, giving up maladaptive patterns, unhealthy beliefs, rigid defenses. He even suggests depression can sometimes stem from a breakdown in our natural ability to let go of things that are lost or no longer useful.
It sounds like a continuous process throughout life.
Absolutely.
Mm.
As we grow and circumstances change, we have to be willing to shed old ways of thinking, relating, being. Letting go allows for growth. Peck talks about life crises at different stages. Navigating them successfully often requires giving up old comforts or perspectives.
This ties into his final points about forgiveness and rebirth then.
Compatibility, whether in relationships or just with life itself, involves holding on to your core self while also being open to others' views, to reality. And that often means you need to give up more than you take to give up rigid stances, preconceived notions.
And through that process of learning, growing, giving up, the pain eases.
That's the idea. The pain associated with necessary sacrifices lessens as we mature. He also notes that more power brings more responsibility, and ultimately, we have to learn to survive and thrive. Avoid needless mental pain, yes, but don't avoid the necessary pain of spiritual growth, because that avoidance leads to greater suffering.
So it's this constant dance. Hold on, let go, learn, grow, find that balance.
Right.
And he loops back at the end saying, you can't give up what you don't have.
Right. You need to develop these aspects of self-discipline first before you can wisely choose what to give up or how to balance things.
And despite acknowledging the difficulty, the pain involved, he seems optimistic that applying these 4 principles, delaying gratification, taking responsibility, seeking truth, finding balance, allows anyone to reach a higher level.
Exactly. It's a challenging path, the road less traveled, but he lays out these principles as the essential tools for the journey towards psychological and spiritual maturity.
This has been, well, really insightful, a great deep dive into just the first part of the road less traveled. We've definitely only scratched the surface here.
Agreed. But hopefully it gives a solid feel for Peck's foundational ideas on self-discipline and why they've resonated for so long.
Absolutely. Thanks for unpacking that with us.
My pleasure. And maybe a final thought for our listeners to chew on, stemming from all this.
Go for it.
Accepting that our maps of the world are always incomplete, always needing revision, that can feel scary, unsettling. Right?
Definitely.
But maybe, just maybe, that acceptance is what opens us up to a much richer, more dynamic, more meaningful experience of life. So the question becomes, what long-held belief, what part of your map might you be willing to question today?
Every topic's got a taste, so like, share, and subscribe now. Your next plate's coming soon.